Добрый.
Что тут такое? Я уже в фризе.
Kyrylenko, Donetsk область.
Kyrylenko.
Good afternoon. I want to thank everybody who joined us. It's Olga Atamanova, and Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform continues its operation. It's year 9 of the war and day 261 of the heroic fight for our freedom. And now we will be talking about the situation in the Donetsk region. Joining us online will be Pavlo Kyrylenko, the military governor of the Donetsk region. Mr. Pavlo, good afternoon. Good afternoon. Today we all the Ukrainians are in such an uplifted mood because we're all waiting for the liberation of our Kherson region, but we don't forget the price we're paying for this liberation, and specifically in the Donetsk region we understand that our military deterred the advance of the occupier. What's the situation in the Donetsk region? How the last day passed? The situation was tense within last day. The hottest points are in Bakhmut, Avdiivka and Novopavlivka direction. In Bakhmut area, the enemy does not quit its effort to break through the defense of the Ukrainian armed forces, either to enter the city or bypass it to develop the offensive operations. The enemy throws a lot of forces to those areas, dividing them, even suffering some fiascos in other areas. The enemy tries at least somewhere to gain some success. That's why they bear humongous losses, but doesn't quit their effort, and without having any success and withdrawing to the previous positions, the enemy in fact destroys the villages and towns along the front line. So Marinka, Krasnogorivka, Vuhledarsk, Avdiivka, Terez, Soledar, Bakhmut, in part the community of Sivers, all suffer constant bombardment and devastation of infrastructure. If we take Bakhmut, for example, we can state that 96% of the infrastructure is completely destroyed, and the enemy destroys everything, like completely, no matter if it's the military object. The enemy shells all the towns and villages along the front line, including enemy infrastructure and defense structures as well. Mr. Pavlo, we've seen the videos shot by our armed forces. They show the level of destruction in Bakhmut. Everything is being destroyed, and we know that last day there were injured and there were deaths. Since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, can you tell us how many civilians became the victims of the occupiers? We document it on a daily basis. The casualties among the civilians. It's I would say it's difficult to remember the day when I did not report any casualties, any losses, or injuries among the civilians. As of today, the injured as of today is 1,193 persons in Donetsk. It's the casualties, and 566 persons injured is without account of Volnovakha and Mariupol, because we understand that after liberation of the mentioned cities, this figure will increase dramatically. It will be measured in tens of thousands, but these figures should be double-checked, reinvestigated, and every fact of the Russian war crimes should be properly documented in compliance with the criminal law. As to the last day, I can say that within the last day, the shellings killed 2 people in Donetsk region and injured 5 civilians. As to the operation of the critical infrastructure, we understand that along the front line, we cannot even talk about this. There's nothing left, but with regard to other part of the region, what's the condition of the infrastructure? Is there water and power supply and communication in the region? I would say that notwithstanding any difficulties and complications, I always answer these questions in accordance with today's realities. The situation is complicated, but we keep doing everything possible. The results of our cooperation, of our teamwork, is relaunch of gas supply and water supply in the region to 15 communities, and there is a systematic reestablishment of the heat supply, and we relaunch heat supply in the apartment buildings throughout 15 communities. So 15 communities will be supplied with gas, with the central heating. Another 10 communities are scheduled for relaunch of critical infrastructure and the object of social importance. I mean those where the heating points will be deployed, and in 11 communities in Solidivska community, for example, the gas supply is impossible, so we will have to conserve the boiler rooms to keep all the equipment under control and to maintain it in operation after the relaunch of gas supply. And by such with such summary, the life in the Donetsk region continues. The evacuation is in progress, but we've taken all the necessary measures to have people from the villages and towns along the front line to be able to be evacuated along the established routes to get themselves evacuated to safer areas. Also, we have prepared the places for such relocation. 82% of the boiler rooms are already in operation, and we start filling the system with the heat supply for the apartment buildings in the largest cities of the region. Out of 97 boiler rooms under the conditions Donetsk region is under, we launched 92. I always count on the worst case scenario, so how we would act in the worst situation, in the most critical situation. We were ready to spend the winter period without gas supply, but thanks to impossible efforts of our gas supply and redistribution companies, military administration, local authorities, the gas supply was reestablished, and people will have warm dwellings during autumn and winter. So we will spend this period in a mixed cycle with gas supply and alternative power sources and redistribution of alternative types of heating with coal and wood across the territorial communities along the front lines. and in the newly liberated territories. That's the key point. What we're doing in the Donetsk region, our main task is to deter the enemy and to destroy the enemy, liberate the areas, and to preserve lives and health of people, to feed those who need it, those who suffer the horrors of war. So in this aspect, I understand that the large number of military, we count on the situation where they can be, where can they be heated. That the occupied towns of Liman and Svetohirsk, was the situation there? Was it possible to stabilize it? The situation in both Liman and Svetohirsk is completely stabilized. The authorities and military administrations re-established their operation there, just as well as law enforcement authorities. The stabilization measures were taken, after which 2/3 of the Liman community now have power supply. It was done in a very complicated way due to the fact that the power lines were completely destroyed. Now they're fully re-established. The energy technicians work on the re-establishment of power supply in Svetohirsk community. Demining is going on, and the transformators are being brought in the area. People are being provided with medicines and food ratios. The construction materials are being constantly brought to the community to be redistributed among those buildings which can be conservated and rebuilt further on, and those who are not subject to renewal will not even be conserved. And the relevant committee is working on this issue, and I already gave an order to have such cases documented and the committees like this established, to record also the war crimes of the Russian Federation, to come up with the opinion of what number of houses have to be rebuilt or built from zero and located in the relevant territories. So again, which houses can be rebuilt and which not. So answering your question and finalizing, I can tell you that the authority was re-established in the territory. The food is in necessary amounts in the communities, and where the applications were submitted, the subventions are being redistributed as to the distribution of the wood and coal and ovens in the newly occupied territories, first of all along the front line, and the authorities pay out pensions thanks to the good job done by Ukrinform, and international aid is being paid out. And in the same way, other stabilization measures are in progress. People get hot foods. International humanitarian organizations deployed their centers in the newly occupied areas I mentioned. In the same way, the regional authorities already defined and are preparing the mass heating stations for people, where the people can temporarily stay and get hot food. First of all, those who got deprived of their dwellings. Mr. Pavlo, what's known about this humanitarian situation in the temporarily occupied cities like Volnovakha and Mariupol and those nearby? I can tell you that the situation with the aid to the people, except for propaganda and fakes, the so-called authorities of DPR or occupational authorities of Russian Federation, they don't care about it at all. So people are left on their own. Let's not forget that at the moment of full occupation of Mariupol, when we applied the extraction procedure for our defenders, thanks to our president, there is a gradual procedure of liberation of our defenders. So the local population who remained in Mariupol, it's more than 100,000 people. So those fake statements about the apartment buildings built, it doesn't cover even 1/1000th of the fraction of the needs of the people in water supply and heat supply, because you cannot provide it in the city, which was 90% destroyed, because internal communications were destroyed as well. And the same situation is in Volnovakha, specifically now that the large part of the city is private residential areas. Dear colleagues, your questions, please introduce yourself. Good afternoon, Irina Mamchur, Ukrinform. I have a couple of questions. First of all, can you please tell me how many collaborationists, if you can come up with the figure, do you identify in communities of Liman and Svetohirsk? And how many of them were in the government offices before? And do the law enforcement agencies record these numbers? Let's start with your last questions. If the law enforcement agencies record these cases, obviously they do after the stabilization measures take place, which also includes the activities of the security service of Ukraine, specifically in part of identification of the collaborationists among the local population, those who remained in the community. There were multiple cases identified, and many people are already in custody. And if we take the number, it's the local population in their majority, but there is still pre-court investigation, and disclosure of this information may only be provided under the sanction of the court or the prosecutor. But the work is going on not only in the newly liberated territories, but across the Donetsk region in whole. It's just that in some regions these stabilization measures are taking place according to the battle orders of the Security Service of Ukraine and other law enforcement agencies. If we're talking about the representatives of the authorities, unfortunately in Svetohirsk, the electee in the Svetohirsk community, I will not comment on his economic crimes, but he is currently in custody. And in fact, all the materials are already worked through by law enforcement agencies back in the day by the military governance of Svetohirsk, but the decision was taken during the occupation, and the president, by his order of appointed a representative of the military administration, and in Liman, the head of military administration, who acted, he keeps working in a coordinated way and organized the work on identification of collaborationists. It's not one or two persons, but I think that after the pre-court investigation will be accomplished, when we will have the award by the court, we can competently comment on this question. Thank you. But the total number of the crimes, is it documented? Do you have a figure? The law enforcement, that the police have that figure. It's been documented, and why I try to focus your attention on that those crimes are being documented across the whole region. I always try to be objective to the maximum extent, and I have information about the military governor, and this is something that I'm entitled to provide the law and order across the whole region. I have the information about the measures being taken, but this information is closed. There are stabilization measures going on. We identify people who are connected to DPR and to Russian Federation authorities, and the number of such people is rather big, but we will be able to say this number after our victory. One more question, please. As to the civil infrastructure, you said about the reconstruction, rebuilding of infrastructure. Do we have enough resource and materials to service the rebuilt infrastructure? Enough resources to maintain and renew it? And do you have enough medics and policemen? As to the reconstruction and renewal, the first and foremost what we talk about is the stabilization measures in part of civil infrastructure. Currently, the rebuilding and renewal of infrastructure is not something we talk about now. If we talk about critical infrastructure like gas supply, power supply, water supply, obviously it's been rebuilt, but for the utility enterprises sometimes the materials, the resources are not enough. But we're in full communication with the head of emergency service of Ukraine, Mr. Krug, and I personally coordinate the activity of all the authorities in the Donetsk region. This is why we are being provided by help of emergency service personnel for the demining and reestablishment of power supply and water supply, and we have brigades sent to our region from other regions of Ukraine to support us. And as to the evacuation of the people, due to this vast piece of work to be done, many utility service personnel, they remained even in that area, but still they're not enough. But with the help of the neighboring regions, the authorities of the regions, they send the teams to us, they help us solve this issue. And as to the renewal of gas and power supply, it's the statement is the you can find evidence of my words that people now have power and water supply reestablished, yes, with breakdowns because it's overcomplicated, but this is what the authority and local government work for, to reestablish these utility services. Do we have any more questions, please?
Question. My name is Lorenzo Cremonesi from Italian Daily Corriere della Sera from Milano. I start with the first one, Mariupol. Sorry, maybe I misunderstood. Can you tell us what is your estimation at the moment? How many, there were new mass graves, by the way, found or apparently found in the Mariupol area. So, first of all, how many, what is the evaluation? How many people have been killed, civilians have been killed? And secondly, how many people more or less are still there, are in Mariupol? We have different figures from different quarters. So this is the first question. Maybe then I have the others too, but can you answer?
Talking about Mariupol, as to the number of people killed, I don't even want to give approximate figures because we have to operate with facts. What I see by the number of houses destroyed and by the number of people considered to be missing, it's tens of thousands of people who died. To confirm the figure, to draw up the final figure, we will be only able to do it after liberation of Mariupol, and to have understanding for about the number of people killed. We have to communicate with the relatives of those who died, so to understand that this or that person died for sure, and there is no chance to find this person among the imprisoned ones. So we will only be able to bring up this figure after the full deoccupation of Mariupol, after clearing the debris, because more than 90% of civil infrastructure of Mariupol is destroyed, and the local authority never cleared the debris, and people were hiding in cellars, in basements, and we have to complete the wars in the mass grave sites of the civilian population in the city itself and outside the city. And only after that we will identify the relatives, the connections to the relatives, and we will complete the court investigation to identify these persons after exhumations, after the complete procedure. So it all can be only said after the full liberation. At least we will come closer to the number that we can disclose, something that will be close to the truth, to find out this real figure, which can be respectively documented as war crimes committed by Russian Federation.
The second question is, I understand, very delicate. I don't know if you can give a figure or an idea of the dimension. How many collaborators you in prison you found in the Donetsk region? Are you able to give us a number? Because we hear all the time about this story, but we are not able to quantify. So how many you think were captured, were identified as collaborators in your region?
As I already answered in part, is the question mostly to the police. The identified collaboration is not only documentation of some suspicious person, but it's when the person is being put in custody, and there is a pre-court investigation, and there should be a court award, and is the secret of the investigation, and only the relevant authorities can comment on that. And in the country in general, there will be total figure, which can be only commented after the victory, because the collaborationists are being identified, and we clearly understand that they don't just cooperate and inflict damage to the sovereignty of our state, so, because they collaborate with the enemy. So there are certain issues that we cannot disclose now, and because it may have some negative consequences. This is why we cannot disclose this figure. I will tell you for sure that as soon as we have such opportunity, the law enforcement agencies will report the very concrete figure.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry, the last question, very briefly. We heard all the time that one of the reasons for the success, or in any case, the continuous persistency of attacks from the Russian against Bakhmut is because in Bakhmut particularly, there is a concentration of Wagner troops, of contractors, experienced veterans of war. Can you confirm that? And do you have an idea how many are they? Do you know? Can you say, first of all, it's true that there is a particular concentration, and secondly, you have an idea of the dimension? How many are they? Thank you.
I can comment that in the Bakhmut area, a significant part of the units who try to thanks to our armed forces, unsuccessfully tried to break through the defense of our armed forces and to capture the territories in the Donetsk region. There are troops from Wagner, but I cannot tell you anything about their professionalism or about their human lives, or no one counts on their coming back. I mean, the Russian authorities, they don't count on them coming back, and part of those Wagner troops are those who were taken from the prisons. It's the documented fact, and even among those who perished, so-called servicemen in the Wagner, they come from the prisons. I want to thank you, Mr. Pavlo, for joining our air. I will remind you, we have Pavlo Kyrylenko joining us, the military governor of the Donetsk region. Dear colleagues, thank you for staying with us. Thank you for covering these very important topics, the events going on in our country. Our team is putting together the schedule of events for Monday. Please follow our announcements. We trust in our armed forces. We trust in our victory, and glory to Ukraine.